Trina and Ramona, for Don, think that Paddock Munson is a woman, and some of the gentlemen think Paddock Munson is a guy. So,
okay, they're signed Cecilia Paddock Munson. And the people who think Paddock Munson was a guy think, well, he's using his wife's name. And I have to say, why would he use a woman's name in a field in which everybody was a man? He wouldn't do that. So of course it was Cecilia Paddock Munson.
Yeah, usually it's the other way around.
That a woman would use a man's name. Yes. So that it's ridiculous. And these men who think that, it's because they can't conceive of the fact that a woman would have drawn this. You know, women drawing comics is impossible.
one of the things that you'll notice about her drawings is that they are very feminine. And that's something that Ramona said about them.
Oh yeah, they're very romantic and feminine. The women are wearing beautiful evening gowns. No, this is not, you know, if you look at the work, it's drawn by a woman. Because you know what? Men and women really do draw differently.
I have a question for Trina. A lot of the pictures that you showed, the work was done by women for Fiction House. I don't know enough about Fiction House's history, but they allowed the creator to sign the page?
Yes, they are signed. Fran Hopper, Lily Renee, Ruth Atkinson, all signed their work. But so did the women who worked for Harvey. Although Barbara Hall in the beginning was afraid that it wouldn't sell if she signed her full name, so she signed it B. Hall, but later she got brave enough to use her full name.
There were two women that worked for my grandfather who drew. One was Myrna Gamble.
Yes.
Who Trina talks. You talked about her in your
I did. Yes.
Okay. So Myrna Gamble drew for my grandfather the whole entire 3-some odd years. She did one of the classic stories, and my mind is a sieve right now. And it's very illustrative of that sort of classic comics type of thing. And then Emma Keane,
She did those cute little single panel things.
Right, and they both signed their names.
Mm-hmm.
And Emma, who went by Keane, she's considered the first woman to have a serial in a comic because she did a couple of comics for my grandfather, 1936. So that's pretty amazing. The other character that a lot of people don't know from my grandfather's period is a character that's, I think, a precursor of Wonder Woman, and she's called Sandra of the Secret Service.
Yes.
And she's phenomenal. She has all these adventures, and she saves a guy a couple of times, and she's very beautiful, of course. So I'm hoping some of those can be.
Does she have any powers? Does she have any powers?
No powers. Maybe mind meld.
But Wonder Woman didn't have any powers in the beginning either. She couldn't fly. She was extremely athletic because she had what they called Amazon training. And the whole point of Wonder Woman was you don't have to have secret powers or special powers. If you have the right training, any woman can be a Wonder Woman. That was the point.
How did you get started?
Me?
Yeah. With comics and all that.
Okay. Yes, I've told this
You have to
story
read
many
her
times.
book.
Oh, I am.
Yes.
No, it's always fascinating how people start, the way to start.
I wrote a memoir that tells you everything, but that's okay, I'll tell you. My mother was a school teacher, and she taught me to read at the age of 4. And boy, did I take to reading. I mean, aside from the fact that my mother also gave birth to me, the greatest gift she gave me was teaching me to read. And I read everything from the very beginning. You know, I didn't start with Dick and Jane or anything. And I also read comics. Now, in those days, a lot of parents didn't approve of kids reading comics because they thought the kids wouldn't read books. But I read everything, books and comics, so it was fine with my parents. And as soon as I was old enough, I guess about 9 or 10, old enough to cross 2 streets, I was able to get to the comic book store on my own and buy comics. And of course, I was always drawing. And once my mother taught me to read, I was also always writing. But the writing was with the reading. So it's the combination of words and pictures is a natural.
Yes.
That's really for both of you. And, I was just really wondering, where did like this idea of like comic books were only for men or only for boys? Was that always the case? Do you feel?
No, not at all.
And then like the second part of the question is, when do you feel like that's changing, and what do you contribute?
Oh,
to
it's changing enormously. Shall I go first? You
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. What happened? Okay, in the very beginning, they were all superheroes, but as you can see, that changed as soon as we went to the war. Okay, the next thing that happened were these teenage girl comics. You saw some of them up there, and also the romance comics, and they were immensely successful. And girls were reading them. You know, at one point, there were more girls reading comics than boys because of these comics. But what happened in the 60s, the early 60s, was the Marvel Revolution, the Marvel Renaissance. They came up with all these new, unusual heroes like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four and Thor and Doctor Strange, and everyone loved these. College kids, hippies, I was a hippie, hippies and college kids were reading these and thought they were, wow, far out, you know.
Yeah.
So because these superhero comics were so successful, they threw the girls' comics and the romance comics under the bus, as it were, and just dedicated themselves completely to superhero comics, which got more and more of a male readership because girls in general are not really interested in reading comics about guys with thick necks and big chins who punch each other out, you know? So then, by the 80s and 90s, it was like totally male superhero stuff, and the comic book companies, the comic stores did not help because they were managed by 30-year-olds who were really 12-year-old boys. And that was what they carried. And the excuse for not carrying anything that might appeal to girls was, girls don't read comics. Well, yeah, they weren't reading comics, like I said about the guys with the thick necks beating each other. No. But as we know, it's like there was a kind of a mass amnesia in the comics world that they forgot that girls ate up these teenage comics and romance comics. Yes.
Trina, do you think the Archie comics were kind of the one place where girls could go
That was all
during that era?
they had.
Yeah.
That was all they had.
Well, I also think that Trina's touched on something that I think had a lot to do with it, and that's that corporate mentality.
Yes.
So that when comics first came out, like I pointed out, in my grandfather's comics, the artist had so many different styles and ideas. It was really creative. And David Armstrong mentions in the afterword of my book that when he interviewed some of these early artists when they were older, that one of the things they kept saying was that it was such an exciting time and they were given a lot of room to create and come up with all kinds of new ideas. And I think as it became, this is one of the big dividing lines for me personally, is that when Donenfeld and Leibowitz took over DC Comics, that corporate mentality began to happen, and it became a corporation, and everything's about the bottom line, and I think, then all these other things that Trina was talking about came into play, and that coupled with that, the finances and the corporate mentality is what really shut women and girls out, because I was reading comics as a girl. I never really thought anything of it. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, I'm not supposed to read comics. Oh, I'm doing something. It was just like,
comics.
So, I think that added to it. It
Definitely.
had a lot to do with it.
I mean, there was a Marvel look. Everyone who drew for Marvel drew the same,
Right,
and the DC look.
right.
I'm a fan of Lois Lane.
Who, me?
Yeah, the comic.
I love Lois Lane. I'm so disappointed. Tim Hanley just wrote a book about Lois Lane, and I really wanted to write a book about Lois Lane. Because in the early comics, she's sort of that Rosalind Russell character.
Yes.
She's kind of sassy and smart alecky and talks real fast and that kind of thing. So, which is
But
kind of cool.
Then in the 50s and 60s,
She
she was
became-
always scheming to marry Superman.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah, going back to the Pulse, there were magazines that were clearly for males, action adventure, and ones clearly for females, romance magazines.
Oh, but wait a
And there were
minute.
many
A lot of women read the science fiction magazine.
They did, and there were many hybrids like Western romances.
Right.
And the editors very carefully calibrated the mixture of male to female components, and they were targeting specific demographics. And they were very conscious of not violating those boundaries. So when I see something like Girl Commandos, it's a sexy female lead character, but it's in a male action-adventure motif. So my question is, who were they targeting? Regardless of the way I'm reading it.
What had happened to, the national feeling was, you see it in all the ads, was that women can do it, or we can do it, the Rosie the Riveter pose. They were working, they were ready for action heroines, We can beat the Nazis too, we can make bombs, we can make planes, we can fly the planes.
So what did the guys think about these series?
I actually don't know, but I know they were very successful.
We had that, just like with the nose.
Right, there were a lot of people
Yeah,
that
there
was
you go.
complaining.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and there were other nose cone paintings of Miss Fury. She was a big hit with the men. And I have to say, Tarby Mills, the artist, definitely played that up because she had drawn this great pinup of Miss Fury getting out of her panther skin costume. It was tame. You didn't see nipples, but you saw a lot. And she had it painted up, and when the GI sent her fan mail, she would send them these pictures.
So I'm trying to figure out how censorship in the 50s impacted all of this, because
Yeah, that was the other
a lot of
aspect
comics
of it
industry.
too, I think.
Plus, we were just talking about
Right.
corporate control, and that really
Right.
strangled everybody. And romance comics, especially the really sweet ones, were like the safe bet.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Actually, romance, everything got kind of mediocre.
Yes.
It's a good word. After the comics code. Because if you look at the pre-code romance comics, like the Simon and Kirby ones, they're wonderful. They're wonderful. And there were also some that were just a little bit sleazy, where the women maybe are, wearing heels that are too high and dresses that are too short. But everything kind of became a boring medium after the comics code. I mean, if you look at those Marvel comics from the 60s and 70s, they're all the same. They're drawn in that Marvel style. They all look alike. They all have really, really inane stories. Whereas the ones before, the Simon and Kirby ones, the characters were working class. They had personality.
Well, I think Superman is a good example. He started out as like, the hero of the working class, turned into like this silly creature.
Question about the Major. He's popped up in a number of different accounts of DC. You don't know what's true, what isn't true, and various.
What I'm telling you is true.
Was he truly adept with a sword?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Another question.
I'm wondering if he had it, did he take it to work with him?
No. All of that is nonsense. He is a very sophisticated man who spoke several different languages. And I found out the other day the whole thing about the beaver hat. Jim Steranko wrote in his, that wonderful comics history of his, there was a mistype, right, Alex? There was a mistype for beater hat.
Oh.
So it wasn't a beaver hat, it was a beater. And I didn't realize, it's the fedora. I didn't realize that the fedora was called a beater. I didn't know that either. Yeah.
One more question. Who was responsible for the Action Comics and the Detective Comics, the logos, which are still in effect today?
Well, we have a group on Facebook for my grandfather, and this has been a conversation recently with Michael Uslan and a number of people. Todd Klein, who's an amazing historian of logos and lettering. And so nobody's really quite sure, but it's leaning towards Vince Sullivan as a good possibility. I think Richard Loder had something to do with it. He was gone by the time Detective Comics logo came in, but he was there for those early comics. Do you know who he is?
I'm sure I've seen the name.
He was an art director at RKO, I think. Don't quote me on that. You can look him up, and he was the art director for the first comics for my grandfather. And there's an animation called the Sunshine Boys, and it's this animated 1930-something cartoon that he was responsible for, and those same characters are in the early comics of my grandfather's. And he did a lot of covers for books, and if you look at his book covers, he had a really great Art Deco style, and that's kind of that same thing. But like a lot of those things in that early period, my guess is that it was more than one person.
Sure, yeah, that's a great comment.
I would just add that one of the values of the early logos is that they serve as a trademark for the comic. And so one of the issues that you have with comics is obviously with copyright expires after a certain period of time. Life of the author plus 7 years now. The brands, however, can go on indefinitely. There is no expiration date for trademark. So DC using the Superman, that S shield, that can go on indefinitely, even beyond copyright, as a way of identifying a company. And Marvel adopted the Spider-Man face as a logo for the same reason. So some of this has to do just tactically with the large companies wanting to preserve their brand identity, even if they at some point, like as Disney will at some point, lose control of things like Mickey Mouse.
I really love those logos, but they take up a lot of cover real estate. And it seems like within a couple of years, they shrunken them down to quite a bit.
Of course, the comics were also much bigger.
Yeah.
Too.
The what?
The comics' physical size were bigger than today's comics too.
Questions, come on. Yeah.
Senorita Rio, when did that originate? What year?
When did it originate? I actually don't know, but you think I want to check that out. Lily was not the first artist on Senorita Rio.
I looked that up at one point.
Oh, thank you.
I think it was the early 40s.
Well, she must have taken over very quickly after that.
Yeah, there was a guy who was doing it
Yeah.
initially, and I think it was like late 30s, early 40s, and then she took it over.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is there are a lot of Hollywood movies with Latin American themes.
Yes,
Sometimes.
yes. I actually do another presentation called Flying Down to Rio, and it's specifically about Tarve Mills and Lily Renee and their Brazilian take on comics. And of course, neither one of them ever went to Brazil. So their Brazilian take on comics has a lot to do with common land.
Pulps were very popular in South America. A lot of my grandmother's pulps were translated into Spanish and Portuguese. And,
Also during the war era, American comics were banned in most of Europe, so
Yes.
they sent.
Even in Canada, because of the
Brazil was a
paper
big market,
shortage.
the spirit was really popular.
Yes. Steve had a question.
Oh, I just thought it worth mentioning that Lily Renee is still alive and with us.
Yes, she is 97 years old. And here's a beautiful story. You know, Lily Renee, who was a teenage girl, 17 years old, had to flee Austria because the Nazis wanted to kill her, and of course all the other Jews. The Jewish Museum in Vienna next year in 2019 is having the Lily Renee exhibit. And, you know, it's like it's come full circle. And she'll, you know, I pray that she hangs on long enough because she'll be there. And I'm going there too.
David Armstrong did help to produce a wonderful documentary that we all saw.
Yes, it's great.
At in San Diego. I'm not sure what's happening with it, but you know, that I hope it gets wider distribution because it's quite wonderful.
It is, it's great.
It's maybe like a French, a Spanish language, with all its English in it.
Wow, that's a good question.
What was the question?
I don't know. I think originally, I think the first ones were American, except there were some precursors in Japan.
Try to that chance.
Yeah, I don't know too much about it, but one of the things that I talked about with a scholar named Dr. John Lent, who teaches at Temple University, he and I talked about this because my grandfather was in Japan in 1916, 17, 18, and we think it's possible that he might have seen those early, they didn't really call them comics, it was like the precursor of anime and manga, the stories. So I don't know that much about it, but I just know that, discussed it and it's possible. So that's really early. Steve?
Also in China, they had at that time similar kind of collections of cartoons and in that format.
Right.
Well, really, comics. I mean, I'm thinking now of Ally Sloper,
Yes.
and what's the name of that other one? I think it was in German. That guy gave a talk on it in Jilin. Oh, it was, remember this?
I remember it, but I don't remember the name.
No, I mean, they go way back in other countries in England.
But they had magazine format similar to what they start, like the New Fun format where they were reprinting cartoons and selling them cheap,
Right.
which may have been an inspiration. for that.
I'm sure because my grandfather was in Asia. He was in China, Japan, the Philippines, and then he spent a lot of time in England, in France, so he had there were a lot of things that